Good morning and welcome to this podcast. Our series is entitled Past, Present, and Future Perspectives on Mental Health in the Black Community. This initiative will consist of a series of podcasts, forums, and healing circles over a 6-month period that strive to expose the negative stigma associated with Black mental health, encourage open and honest discussions among men, women, and youth, and provide tangible solutions toward healing and recovery. We want to show our appreciation to the City of Toronto for their support toward this worthy endeavor. Today's podcast will discuss the state of mental health on Canadian Black women. Part of our past, present, and future perspectives on mental health in the Black community series, this podcast will look at the significant disparities Black women face that affects mental health, from the social and racial injustices historically to the various roles that Black women are forced to play in society. This discussion will cover the experiences of Black women as they face sexism, racism, and at times financial inequality, and debunking the concept that Black women are without emotion and feeling. Finally, we will allow this podcast to promote the mental health of Black women, optimizing treatment outcomes, and taking appropriate future directions in a culturally sensitive manner to accomplish a successful outcome. I'm your host, Alexandra Bain, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this very important podcast. I am joined by two incredible Black women in the health field in Toronto and in Canada at large. And I wanted to begin this podcast by just posing a question. I know that when I come across discussions of health, Black health, and mental health in general, it's often a conversation of the disparity that exists at the beginning of our interactions with medical professionals. And it's often a conversation relating to diagnosis and misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis of people in our community, specifically Black women. We know that Black women are often not believed when they say that they are presenting certain symptoms, and these are physical symptoms and mental, emotional symptoms as well. And so, Wangari and Michelle, in both of your practices and your research and your interactions with the health field, how have you identified this relationship between Black women and how they are perceived and believed when they are trying to seek help from medical professionals?
Wangari, if you don't mind, I'll start. My experience stems from, I would say, my first experience was working, as a candy striper and in housekeeping in a very large, internationally known training hospital. And when I was a young person just coming up, I felt that, you didn't have the dedicated attention that you were looking for from your care practitioner, because maybe you weren't perceived as being very serious, or you didn't have a parent who was welcoming you to the practitioner. And that goes a long way, because when someone is there, then the young person who is looking for support or even healthcare support, they are taken more seriously when they're introduced by an elder, a parent, a guardian, and so on. And as my life has kind of evolved, I've personally experienced, and know others who have experienced, perhaps a doctor convincing you that maybe what you're feeling was not as sharp, or wasn't as painful, or wasn't as detrimental, and certainly was not going to prevent you from attending work or caring for your children. What I've experienced is that maybe I did not know my body as well as a practitioner who had just met me 15 minutes prior. So I think I'll start there. Wangari, what have you experienced?
I think for me, the experiences are very similar, and I'm actually going to talk particularly around this piece of access in particular, you mentioned when you're a young Black person, a young Black woman. So for my daughter, and that is today we're talking about, when she goes into a healthcare facility, the first thing that she's looked at as a Black woman is drug seeking, right? Even before anything else has been addressed. It's that overarching belief that, oh, you're here, you're saying you're in pain because you need, you're drug seeking, essentially. And it's the most offensive thinking that there is. Now, as somebody who moved to Canada as an adult, access to healthcare for particularly, and I'm going to bring this up because it does come up a lot in our community, around people who have experienced FGM, and how that particular community is mistreated really within the healthcare system, where people are being exposed and being shown as an anomaly sort of situation, and women not seeking healthcare, particularly sexual healthcare, because of that stigma around what has occurred within their physical body. So all of that, plus the fact that, and I don't know, Michelle, I'm going to say that I think as a Black woman, we do know our bodies well enough to know that by the time we're seeking healthcare, we really do know that something is wrong. We are self-aware in that sense. And so you're right, when somebody who's only met you for 17 minutes decides that you do not know your body well enough, therefore they're going to either tell you to walk out and grin and bear it kind of thing, or worse, that they're going to then diagnose you with something that may or may not be what it is, because they feel that they can. I think those dichotomies are really, really strong within my experience. And even as today, as I work with young moms, particularly at the Massey Center, those are some of the issues we are dealing with the young women. She walks in, she's pregnant or she's just had a baby, and automatically that young Black woman is going to be labeled in many, many, many different ways, including people simply picking up the phone and calling CAS because they feel that they can.
That is interesting that you say that, Wangari. I had heard stories about people going to a care practitioner for the first time, maybe because they have acute situation, so they're gone to emergency or a walk-in clinic, and being looked at as though they were drug seekers. So I had heard stories, so I'm glad that you brought that to light. And my personal experience has been to the contrary. I tend to be a very naturalistic person. I find my own remedies from, my primarily my own culture, but from other cultures. So when I do arrive at my care practitioner's doorsteps, it's because I've exhausted all other options and I really do need support at that point. And my experience in those particular situations are, why are you not taking something that I'm prescribing to you? There is no other alternative other than the path that I've created, which is either an invasive path or one that requires me to have health benefits, of which I have, but maybe taking medication that will provide me some temporary reprieve, but may have longer standing side effects that I'm not prepared to sign on for. So it's very interesting that you do say that, and I'm glad that you were able to share it. I will give just a really quick example if I can. I remember when I had my second child, I was suffering quite badly from dizzy spells. Every time I would get up, I'd have a dizzy spell, and it became very bad. And I remember my GP referred me to a neurologist. So that is a direct referral. And when I went to the neurologist, I had the baby with me, of course, because, that's just what you do as a mom. Sometimes you have to bring your child with you. And the neurologist refused to treat me. And I thought, what is happening? I had a referral, I have symptoms, it's gotten to the worst extreme. Why am I being refused? I actually had to say to the neurologist, if I go back in my car and I have a dizzy spell with this child in the car and I pass out and we both die, this is the last place I was. And it was because I said that, did I get the treatment that I was referred to. So that is a little bit concerning. But then again, I've learned how to have a voice as a young mother because of those kinds of situations.
And so, Michelle, that brings us back to our issues as Black women and always having to go to war, literally, for that which is rightfully ours. So by the time we're getting to the doctor, we know we're really unwell, because otherwise, as you said, we self-care. We do a lot of background work within our communities with the knowledge that we've inherited from our ancestors, and so on and so forth. And so when you actually get to that door, you know that your body has reached a certain level. And yet here is a person who knows very little about you, doesn't spend the time to hear you, to learn about you, to ask about your history, so that they can at least begin to understand where you're coming from. And within our communities, you can ask me a whole bunch of questions, and for some of us, even the historical records are not written down. We came from other places where that history is probably not as clear. So part of that is a very big piece for me as a Black woman when I walk in. And the other piece for me is, one of the things that really irritates me when I go to my doctor is being asked to stand on a scale and then being told, well, your BMI this and your bones this and the other. We are larger people, well, at least I am. And, our bodies are not the same. The standards are set by a different community, shall we say, whose diets and whose body structures are completely different from ours. And so we are who we are.
we are far more shapely.
Exactly. Absolutely, right. And so that we carry that. So when your doctor is telling you that your BMI should be this and the other, that is based on somebody whose lifestyle and whose everything is very different. But I want to come back to the mental health piece around all of this. So, I say to people that when I wake up in the morning, I have to put on a body armor, right? I know that as soon as I step out my door, the microaggressions, the abuse, then everything will hit me at the door. So when I think about my mental health, I think about that armor that I have to wear every morning as I step out my door, right? Because if I don't have that armor on, somebody will hurt me and I will carry that hurt. So I don't, I've had these conversations with my fellow co-workers who are not Black. The funny thing is I've just started to write reviews around how when I get to a hotel room, my hotel room always faces the dumpster. I go upstairs to my other co-workers whose hotel rooms are facing, the best scenic possible. And we're all paying the same. We arrived at the same time. I get the dumpster view, they get the seaside view. But all of those things eventually wear you down, right? Every day you leave your home and you have to prepare yourself for war. When I go to the shop, this person is going to assume, assumptions will be made. When I was at Across Boundaries, I used to say to people, whenever I walk into the shop across the road, it's a big pharmacy, and you start hearing this, aisle 4, please go and check the stock in aisle 4. That always resonates with me as a Black woman. I'm in aisle 4. What has suddenly happened in aisle 4 where I happen to be? So all of that microaggression, all of that constant war within ourselves really, really does grind down our mental well-being. I don't think that there are other communities that live with this constant fear of being who you are. A battle of having to fight for what you need or what you want or what your rights are.
Yes, Oh, sorry, Michelle.
Oh, no, go right ahead, Alexandra.
Yes, Wangari, I completely agree. And I thank you for making that connection between what we face in society and our mental health. Earlier, when we were having the discussion on how Black women are believed when we go into the medical field and try to seek help from these professionals, there has to be something said for, I go into the doctor's office because I am already sick. Let's say I have something as simple as the flu. We know that Black women experience much more than that. We have high blood pressure, we have heart conditions, all things that are that take a toll on our bodies. I think there's something to be said for how then it must, these conditions must be compounded by the stress and toll that it takes for you to not be believed by the person that you are seeking help from. I think that it must be making us sicker in some regard for these professionals to not believe our stories. I think that mental health and physical health are closely tied. And so I guess if either of you want to speak on what you've seen in the field as far as this connection, whether it's becoming more difficult for us to heal from the symptoms that we're experiencing because of the lack of care that we are facing, and how stressful it must be, the toll that it takes on our mental health on top of all of these physical ailments.
Alexandra, you make a really good point in the correlation between physical health and mental health and how closely they are related. A few decades ago, when I first entered into this space of cultural awareness and of course equity, I delved into cultural intelligence and cross-cultural counseling. And what that brought to light was there's an assessment that can be done about, how people aspire through societies. Mm-hmm. So society allots points for certain things. Let's put it that way for layman's terms. So for instance, if you are of a certain age, you make a certain income, points are meaning success points, achievement points in life are given to you. You have 2 children, achievement points. You're married, you get additional points. If you are, live in a house versus rented, and all of these points stack up. And the unfortunate thing is, Black women in many cases are not able to achieve, because some of you who are even listening to this, you're thinking to yourself, well, if I haven't been promoted, then I've lost points there. If I've had a stressful relationship and it terminated, points are lost there. If I have too many children or no children. And so when we look at the hierarchies in society and the determinants of social adjustment or health, Black women have a lot to burden. Wangari mentions the armor. And as soon as she said the suiting up of armor, I thought those are heavy weights to start on so early in the day. And so carrying all these weights are attributed to the points that I refer to. And so what I find is, especially over the last 2 years, as Black women, we've had to, for survival purposes, for our mental health, become desensitized to many of the expectations that life and society has had for us. We've endured a civil rights awakening. All of these things affect our mental health. And of course, with enough pressure and enough time and frequency, they eventually will affect our physical health. If I am holding anger, bitterness, resentment, I feel hopeless, all of those things directly affect your internal organs, in specific your liver. Your liver is an important, very highly important organ, which very seldom is looked at when you are under the care of a practitioner. The organ is the life breath of human beings, and it detoxifies all of the contaminants that we're going through, whether they be physical, emotional, or what have you in our lives. And so therefore, if we have these overlapping pressures and the armor to suit up in order to deflect, but also weigh you down at the same time. And then I refer to these structural or social points. The Black woman is really challenged from an emotional perspective and from a health physical perspective. So I leave that at your floor, Wangari, to take a stab at some of the things that I've said there.
And I couldn't agree more, Michelle, particularly when you talk about our internal health, right? It's very interesting because in Western medicine, it's all about your external in many ways, how you look, all of that. And in some ways, we tend to only look at the physical and not the internal and particularly the organs that rule our lives. One of those being, of course, the liver, the brain, our heart health and all of those. So, part of well-being, and I think the crux of the matter here is that, Western interventions have become very, very pharmaceutical as opposed to holistic. And because of that, the reliance on a prescription as opposed to lifestyle and health changes have become the way to go. For many of our physicians. I cannot tell you how many times I've been prescribed this for the other and whatnot. Well, all really I needed was a good night's rest. So I completely agree with that in terms of where we need to, where we are as a healthy community in addressing social determinants of health. Really, those skills are fantastic, but not many of us, even those of us who are looking outwardly wealthy in many ways, can reach those goals, right? Even when they talk about family supports, as Black women, we end up being the family support. You've got, you're either in a sandwich generation where you're taking care of your parents, whatever part of the world they happen to be residing in. You've got your siblings that you are semi-supporting. And then you've got, if you have children or if you've adopted or if, other familial members who depend on you as their breadwinner, so to speak. So those pressures continue. And I have to say, I don't know where you are with things, but I can say most of the Black women in my circle, particularly in healthcare, are now in middle management. And I don't know if they're in senior management positions. A lot of weight on those women in terms of those career, maintaining their careers. Some have, are juggling two positions because, that is what they need to do in order to sustain their families. So all of those things, leaves very little time for us to self-heal, right? I can say in the last 2 years, one of the things that has been very difficult, I think, particularly for Black women, is one of the places where we self-heal is where we have people take care of our hair, for instance, a very basic thing, but a place where we sit, we come together, we chit-chat, we relax, we laugh, we love. But that hasn't been possible for many of us during lockdowns, right? Not to mention the economy that has gone down for those women, but that camaraderie for us, those healing circles, as we call them, within our families. I think for me, the last 2 years, in particular around the Black family that heals by coming together, has been really difficult in the fact that we couldn't come together in our traditional ways of sitting, sharing bread and just sharing our tears and our joys. So I'll leave it at that for now because I think I had another point, but I've sort of talked myself out of it.
There was an amazing book that I was fortunate enough to get my hands on called Community Cure. And it really speaks to some research that has been done on a number of communities and how they were able to see some some change, some emotional stability over the communities that were able to gather together, share their concerns or whatever they were trying to overcome at that time in conversation with one another. Not always in with the focus of solving one's problem, but being able to share or what we refer to as offloading the burden through conversation. And you made very good point of the places that we refer to as, your AKA watering holes, the places where we go to have our hair cut. They're not merely places where we go to have our nails done, our hair cut. It's a place where someone can share their energy transfer to you, where we can have uncensored or unscripted conversations, where we can talk about our most intimate challenges that are happening in our personal lives. And through sharing, we realize we are not alone. And as you mentioned earlier, in some cases, those things would heal and are alternatives that Western medicine has no awareness even exist. So I really do love those pieces, and I find that when we are looked at economies that are in constraint, those are things that we can tap into as possible solutions, or at least aids in our journey at overcoming some challenges that we might be facing as individuals.
Michelle, that's a great point. I think that, you spoke a lot about community and its importance for Black people, specifically for the diaspora. I feel like there's many individuals in Canada that identify as first generation, people who came to Canada or to the Western world in general by themselves without their families, hoping to realize a dream. And I think for those people, for Canada in general, how, if either of you can speak to how people that lack that community for a certain point in their lives, how they can go on and make sure that they're maintaining that mental health, self-care piece in the absence of community and being away from their families at whatever point in their lives.
So that, I think, is one of North America's biggest downfall when it comes to Black people, and specifically Black women. We do not operate well in silos. We've always lived and operated in communal villages. So think about childcare, right? In this country, you childcare solo, no matter. In our communities, the child belongs to the village. The child is buoyed by the community, never alone, never without a point of reference. And then you come to North America, and even if you come as a family, you then become a silo, a little nucleus that has to survive entirely on its own. And so when I did speak about that body armor, that's what you have to do. That's what people have to do when they come here, is turn insular. There's no community. There are very few places for people to go. That's where we, when I spoke earlier in my introduction, where I talked about an agency such as Across Boundaries that was opened to support the Black community, the African community specifically, that was coming into Canada some years back and not having a place to go to. In that center, the walls, the color of the paint, the food, the drumming sessions, the dance, the music, everything was is so geared towards traditional healing methods that bring together a community. People don't just come because they have a mental health issue. They come because it's a village. They stay because it's a village. So I think recreating some of those pieces, and they are hard because when people come here, the first thing they have to do is finish their education and or get a job. You have very little time to do anything else. Healing becomes a it takes a back seat essentially. And I think you can see, and there were statistics done a few years ago where people came into Canada as immigrants who are very, very healthy, both physically and mentally. 10 years down the road, they did the same, statistical analysis. And those folks had their mental health as well as their physical health had dropped tremendously. Here we are, we come here for a better life, and yet our health, both physical and mental, deteriorates 10 years after we've been in the country.
Wangari, I've seen this report that you're referring to. It does look at, settlement and how our health, emotional health, physical health can deteriorate within, I think even somewhere in the report, it spoke about 2 to 5 years, equivalent to someone who has been here for 10 years as a domestic person. So my experience, especially over the last 2 years, and how can you, I guess, create some kind of options for yourself or even preemptive measures preparing for what we've experienced. So we've experienced isolation, similar if you're settling in the country. Over the last 2 years, we have experienced that. So knowing what we know, we're able to recreate, as Wangari says, cooking our own foods. So we've got a wonderful time now where we have summer that is shortly in front of us. We can start growing foods that are familiar to us, okras and kalalus and things that we can grow and make so that when we're in our dark times, whether that means emotional dark times or actual weather, climate dark times, we have things that through their energy and through their familiarity can bring joy. Connecting with community members through the phone, through Skype. Skype. I don't know if anyone's still using Skype, but Skype, the platform we're using currently. But one of the things that I've taken stock over and have also prepared for is, what kind of music do I really enjoy? And how can I get access to that now to prepare myself for those moments when maybe I don't have someone to lean on? So looking backwards in order to prepare for the future, very simplistic things. I go for a walk every single morning in nature, by the water. People may or may not know the significance of nature, of vibration, of water flowing, of sound bathing. These are all things that people can do if we were ever in a situation where you were unable to get access to a care provider or to have a friend answer a phone call. These are things where you have at least a little bit more control as an individual to be able to aid yourself as a temporary or long-term measure if you endeavor to create a habit out of it. I think these are really good tools that people can start using for themselves, yoga, and I think there's much to be said for eating well, which also supports optimum mental health. Many of the prepared foods, the fast foods, the foods that are not traditionally cultural do have an adverse effect to our emotional and long-term mental health.
Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. If I can insert a shameless plug to the healing circles that are part of this series that we are doing. The healing circles, I encourage you all to go online and see when the next one is being hosted. But they speak a lot to what Michelle mentioned around teaching anyone who chooses to join around the role of nature and what traditional practices our community has leaned upon for a very long time to heal and to foster community and to encourage a sense of resilience. And so, yes, just inserting that shameless plug for those healing circles. I think it's a great opportunity for any individual that's listening to learn more about those traditional practices that were used for such a long time and still are used. Wangari and Michelle, I guess on that same note, if you all can speak a little bit more to any traditional practices from your own communities that you feel like have been helpful or encouraging for you in sustaining your mental health. And we spoke a lot to these points earlier in the podcast, but just how we can then use these traditional practices in tandem with Western medicine to make sure that we have the most holistic form of support.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry. Okay, thank you so much. I think just as a recap to a few things that I've mentioned, I have found vibration to be very significant for my healing and for many of the practitioners that I do work with. And it is certainly making its way to Western, it's making its way into the Western community as an alternative, not a immediate remedy, but it certainly will support people who are struggling with anxiety. And when I talk about vibration, so people listen to music, sometimes cultural music, all sound comes with its own vibration, whether it's curated music or sound that comes from nature, meaning rushing water, sound of wind through trees. And that is why when we go out in nature and we hear the wind blowing or birds chirping and things of that nature, we automatically feel this reduction in stress. Now, if you wanted to move to a more formal way, there are singing bowls or an opportunity, beating drums. I personally grew up as a first-generation Canadian in an art school, so I played the cello. And I am making it as my life mission to ensure that I go back to playing the cello again for its automatic reduction of stress. It has a beautiful sound to start with, but it also helps with that feeling grounded through its deep notes. So there are things that will support your balance in all of your healing modalities that you're using. Western medicine doesn't survive on its own, neither does community traditional medicine, or what people refer to as alternative. All of these work in tandem and have a place and a time. And sometimes when you can't get that immediate conversation with a therapist, you can play music. You can make the sound of music, or you can enter nature and experience music in order to really capture that vibration that will harmonize with the body and help to reduce the body's stress. Wangari.
I could not agree more. Our traditional healing methods that include the drum speak to that vibration that Michelle is referring to. There is nothing more that vibrates your body than the beating of that conga. One of the things that we have encouraged most of our people to do is to go back to dance. Just do the Zumba. Don't worry about the style. Dance really, really kicks in those wonderful brain cells that make you happy. But movement, as you said, going for a walk, but mostly I think around dance. Anybody can dance. That's, left feet, right feet, whatever. But find some few minutes, because I'm not good at meditation, for instance. My brain just keeps zapping. But I will dance. I will dance to anything. A nice beat of music will get me moving. And we have found that movement and that drumming, that rhythm really does work well for people. And Michelle, we can't take away the bit about what you put in your mouth, what you put in your system, because that's also what feeds you. And in tandem with, a lot of medications, a lot of pharmaceuticals actually eat away at your liver and eat away at your intestines as they're healing you. So finding foods that are traditional to us that provides that internal healing. The fish, and particularly in the First Nations community, fish that is rich in omega-3s has been something that they use for their own healing, and that has proven to be really, really worthwhile for all of us. I think for me as well, as a Black woman in the city, and Michelle, you talked about this, sometimes for those of us who have the privilege and the ability and the time, is to take the bull by its horn, get engaged, pick a board that you want to sit on so you can make the change there and know that you're making the change. Run for the school board, whatever it is that makes you and allows you to empower yourself and your community. There's nothing that makes me feel better than coming out of a meeting and knowing I've changed that comma that was denying a family a proper source of income, because that comma is the one that stopped the fund from coming into that family, because they have 3 children as opposed to they have 4 children and not 3. So those kinds of things, becoming engaged in your co-op or the community that you live in, those pieces really, really become a source of empowerment and a source of engagement for you back into the community, even as we come back out of this major isolation that I think, as a Black woman, for me was devastating. I have not recovered from being isolated. I'm a people person, and I really, really miss people, and that has had a huge impact on me. I'm the kind of person who goes around Toronto saying hello to every stranger that I meet on the road, and I couldn't do that because I couldn't see their face, and that was a barrier for me.
Wangari, I absolutely love your comment about taking some level of control and giving back through volunteerism, through having a voice on a board, having a voice on a committee that is making meaningful change, that if not impacting you directly in your household, is impacting and changing the life of someone else. Because as community members, we are feeling that we have given back, we have served. What is really our global call is to support one another. Some of us have been misguided and don't realize, but the call is for all of us to make this planet a better place than when we came here, and our ability to give back through volunteering on a committee, on a board, through your local SCC or your community council or what have you, neighborhood watch, or even helping a neighbor over this last weekend who may have had a tree that has fallen or damage on their yard. Those are opportunities that are all around us for us to have a moment where we can be significant, where we can be seen, where we can be heard, where we can make change, and don't have to go to an interview to be approved. So we have so many opportunities everywhere we look. They don't always have to be formalized. I sat on my in my earlier days, the first time I moved out, I lived in a not-for-profit. I sat on the board, and I have not stopped sitting on boards. Right now, I sit on a hospital's board, as we mentioned, and a number of others. Education is a passion for me as well. But those are things, my family does not get a direct impact or benefit from that, but I know that I, as an individual, have contributed on this planet before I've left it.
Thank you both for those tips and recommendations. We all, during this conversation, have spoke about the importance of community. And so the same way that we're doing in this conversation, Michelle, you're giving tips and what you have gathered from your experiences to Wangari, and Wangari, you're doing the same thing. I think that finding that in our individual lives is very important. I guess I just making space for any last comments or pieces of advice that either of you have before we end.
My hope around this is, we still live, and we are, and we need to own this as a community. Stigma around mental health is still very much a barrier for many of us. We really, really cannot wrap ourselves around saying that, we have a family member or we ourselves are experiencing a mental health breakdown or a mental health illness of any kind. That in itself creates, a lot of barriers for us as a community. Of course, some of that is based on self-preservation, and I quite hear that, and I get that. I do want us to come from a place of, mental health is health. It is not separate. Unfortunately, we live in a society where health is from your neck down, and we've ignored the neck up, including, things like dental, which have a major impact on one's mental health. You don't have teeth, you can't smile, you're going to be a very miserable person. So I do want to emphasize within our communities that mental health is not a new phenomena for us. We have had throughout our societies people with mental illness. We have supported our communities with mental illness, and to be okay about acknowledging that we have these challenges, and I can't imagine them being any more than they were in the last 2 years. We've got young people who have lost, who are completely lost. They were lost before the pandemic, and even more so, they are much more vulnerable now as we return back to what will be post pandemic. So for me, the parting piece, particularly around Black women, and I don't want to add, because I know as Black women, I think about all the women who are working in frontline, who never got the privilege of working from home through the pandemic, carried our long-term care facilities and the patients there. I can't imagine that they have any more resources left within themselves. But I do want us to really, as a society, as a community, come to grips with the fact that this isn't a choice. We really must embrace the fact that this is an illness like any other. And when we seek supports, that we will hopefully be able to seek and find the right places for us to go and be healthier.
I love that. If I were to point at a few things in parting that I would love to see change for our community, and specifically for Black women, whether they're navigating corporate challenges, whether they've been given promotions to handle global challenges that have existed long before they receive their positions, whether they are navigating children and their children's mental health is, please provide yourself with some self-care. Whether or not that means you need to soak your feet on a Sunday or paint your nails, or my favorite thing is I go to the VIP movies, have a little bit to eat, bring my fuzzy blanket, and I go to sleep. And that is a place of peace. No one's asking anything of you. It sounds a little humorous, and I'm sure somebody's taken videos of me on social media, but you have to know when you are at the end of your rope and try to save yourself before you get to that place. I would also say, know thyself. So that means that you are in tune with your body enough to know that if you have that pain, is it the same pain as yesterday? If you are feeling anxious, can you track back where it started? Can you calm yourself down enough to think clearly? I find it is helpful, and I encourage others, and many of my clients will journal, to be able to see the difference from one day to the next, or 1 week, or a year, and the progress they've made, or the language that they are using when they speak about circumstances or themselves. Do a body check-in. the morning, the middle of the day, and in the evening. How do I feel? And stop and allow your body to speak to you. Do I feel calm? Do I feel anxious? Do I have any pains? Because most of the time when we arrive at the doctor's office, they'll ask, how long have you been feeling that pain? Where do you feel it? Is it sharp? Is it dull? We don't remember because we walk through life 8 hours a day, numb to our own bodies. So journaling, doing check-ins, and of course, please understand we are all on the spectrum. We are all on the mental health spectrum. Whether or not there was 2 years of pandemic or not, as human beings, a part of the human condition is to be challenged. So we are all navigating to and fro and in flex our mental health. It is when your mental health is, you can't find reprieve, when it is distracting you or preventing from excelling or moving forward in life, or preventing you from care of others or yourself. So if you cannot stand up to maybe some people or some circumstances in your life, sometimes it is better to stand aside. And so I would like people to really sit down and think about those words and take action in your life. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be profound. Sometimes it's just not reacting or responding.
Thank you, Michelle. That movie, VIP thing, is my favorite. I have done that many a times. It is excellent and a beautiful escape.
I am so glad to hear it's not just, it's not just me. Yes, the little moments of peace that we find on a daily basis.
Well, Michelle and Wangari, I thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. You both are incredible Black women and leaders in your field. And so we thank you for your contributions to this discussion. This has been the state of mental health on Canadian Black women as a part of our series on the past, present, and future perspectives on mental health in the Black community. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to our next conversation. Thank you all and have a great day.